Admiral Zorax stood on the command deck of his flagship, the imposing dreadnought Inevitable Conquest, as it emerged from hyperspace near Jupiter. The massive gas giant loomed in the view screen, its swirling storms a backdrop to the fleet of 300 warships now assembling in perfect formation behind him. "Preliminary scans of the target planet are complete, Admiral," announced Sub-Commander Vexlor, his four-fingered hand sliding across the holographic display. Zorax's four eyes narrowed as the image shifted to show Earth, a blue-green marble against the blackness of space, so small, so vulnerable. After 2 centuries of military service to the galactic hegemony and dozens of successful planetary acquisitions, he had developed an instinct for evaluating civilizations. This one appeared disappointingly simple. "Military capabilities?" he inquired, his voice a low rumble that resonated through his throat sacs. "Primitive, Admiral. Nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, energy-inefficient aircraft. Their most advanced vessels are confined to their oceans. No orbital defenses of consequence." Vexlor's lipless mouth twisted in what passed for a smile among their kind. A standard intimidation display should secure immediate capitulation. Zorax flicked his secondary eyelids in acknowledgement. Another routine conquest for the glory of the hegemony. Yet something about this species tugged at his curiosity. "Cultural assessment?" he asked, turning to Intelligence Officer Mesra, who had been unusually quiet during the briefing. The slender officer stepped forward, her skin shifting from the standard military green to a thoughtful blue. "Fascinating anomalies, Admiral. Despite their technological limitations, they devote substantial resources to creating simulated environments they call games. Particularly noteworthy are simulations of warfare, resource management, and civilization development." Zorax's tentacles twitched with mild surprise. "Entertainment during their final days, or religious practice?" "Neither, Admiral," Mesra continued, displaying footage on the main screen. "They compete in these simulations. Observe." The screen filled with images of humans, thousands of them in enormous arenas, watching other humans manipulate controls while virtual battles raged on massive displays. The competitors' faces showed intense concentration, their reactions lightning fast. They call this esports, professional competition using war simulations. Their global networks host millions of participants daily. Some devote their entire careers to mastering these artificial scenarios. Third Officer Kralik scoffed, his dermal plates clicking in amusement. Children playing at war when they should be preparing for actual conflict. Pathetic. But Zorax didn't share his officer's dismissive attitude. He watched the footage with growing interest as a human female outmaneuvered her opponent through a series of complex tactical decisions, executed with remarkable speed. "How accurate are these simulations to actual warfare?" he asked. Mesra hesitated. "Variable, Admiral. Some incorporate realistic physics and resource constraints. Others are purely fantastical. But the strategic thinking required." She paused. "It's not entirely dissimilar to our officer training programs." Zorax turned away from the screen, his mind calculating possibilities. "Prepare the standard intimidation protocol," he ordered, "but I want a full analysis of these games before we proceed to conquest. Perhaps there's more to these humans than appears on initial assessment." As his officers dispersed to carry out his commands, Zorax remained at the view screen, studying the small blue planet. In his 3 centuries of life, he had conquered 17 worlds for the hegemony. None had offered any meaningful resistance or surprise. Something told him this time might be different. Admiral Zorax studied the holographic projections in his private chamber, his secondary hearts pulsing with an unfamiliar rhythm. For 3 full cycles, he had immersed himself in Earth's games, watching hundreds of competitions and analyzing their structures. The more he observed, the more a bold idea took shape in his mind. "You requested my presence, Admiral." Vexlor stood at attention in the doorway, his uniform impeccable as always. Zorax gestured toward the displays. "What do you see here, Sub-Commander?" "Humans engaging in frivolous simulations, sir." Look closer. Zorax expanded one particular display, a championship match of a space-based strategy game. Observe the decision-making speed, the resource allocation, the tactical adaptations. Vexilor's eyes narrowed. Interesting patterns, but hardly relevant to our mission. On the contrary, Zorax rose to his full height, looming over his subordinate. I believe these games offer an unprecedented opportunity. He outlined his plan, not the standard conquest protocol, but something new. A series of challenges using Earth's own virtual environments, slightly modified with hegemony interfaces. Victory would mean Earth's independence. Defeat would mean surrender. Vexilor's skin darkened with alarm. Admiral, this is unprecedented. High Command expects. High Command expects results. Zorax cut him off. 17 worlds I have delivered to the hegemony. I have earned the right to determine methodology. An hour later, the War Council assembled on the bridge. As expected, the opposition was immediate and vociferous. This is absurd, Fleet Commander Dresnel growled. We have overwhelming military superiority. Why risk failure through games? Zorax let them vent their objections before speaking. 3 reasons. First, a conquered population requires constant oversight. A population that acknowledges its own defeat requires far fewer resources to manage. Second, these challenges will provide invaluable intelligence on human cognitive patterns and decision-making processes. And third, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I believe this approach may yield discoveries valuable beyond this single conquest. The objections continued, but Zorax held firm. By the end of the council, they had acquiesced, if reluctantly. Around Earth, emergency sirens blared as communication systems worldwide were overridden. On screens from Tokyo to New York, from rural villages to metropolitan centers, the alien Admiral's face appeared. People of Earth, his translated voice boomed. I am Admiral Zorax of the Galactic Hegemony. My fleet stands ready to conquer your world. Panic erupted across the globe. Military forces scrambled to defensive positions, knowing their weapons were hopelessly outmatched. However, Zorax continued, I offer you an alternative path. A series of challenges using your own virtual environments. Victory means your independence. Defeat means surrender. In the White House Situation Room, generals pounded tables in frustration. It's a trick, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs insisted. They're buying time for something worse. At the United Nations, diplomats from 100 nations debated furiously. We have no choice, the Secretary General said finally. We must accept these terms. Meanwhile, in gaming communities worldwide, a different reaction took hold. From professional esports teams to casual players, millions began organizing, analyzing, and preparing. In Seoul, the Korean Esports Association convened an emergency meeting. In California, major game developers opened their servers for training. In London, strategic analysts began studying every competitive game ever created. On the Inevitable Conquest *, Zorax received Earth's formal acceptance of his challenge. Prepare the first competition, he ordered, a strange excitement building within him. Select Commander Vexilor as our representative. As Vexilor bowed and departed, Zorax turned back to the view screen. For the first time in centuries, he faced an outcome he couldn't predict with certainty. That, he realized, was precisely what made it so interesting. The global broadcast began at precisely 900 UTC. Every screen on Earth showed the same split image. On one side, Commander Vexilor of the Galactic Hegemony, his greenish skin gleaming under the ship's lights, his 4 eyes focused intently on the control interface before him. On the other side sat Lai Wei, a slender 19-year-old from Shanghai, adjusting her headset with trembling fingers. This is insanity, whispered the Chinese ambassador to his American counterpart at the United Nations Observation Center. The fate of our planet in the hands of a teenager. Not just any teenager, replied the American. She's won 3 world championships. If anyone can do this. Admiral Zorax watched from his command chair, surrounded by his senior officers. "Begin the simulation," he ordered. The virtual arena materialized, a complex star system with a dying red giant at its center, surrounded by resource-rich planets, treacherous asteroid fields, and strategic choke points. Both competitors would command identical fleets, with the objective of either eliminating the opponent's main command vessel or controlling 3 specific planets for 5 consecutive minutes. Vexlor deployed immediately, his ships moving into classic hegemony formation, a defensive sphere around his command vessel with strike teams positioned at calculated intervals. It was a strategy perfected through millennia of actual space warfare. Lai Wei's deployment appeared random by comparison. Her ships scattered across the system in patterns that made no tactical sense to the watching aliens. "The human doesn't understand basic fleet protection," remarked Fleet Commander Dresnel with a dismissive flick of his tentacle. "This will be over quickly." 10 minutes into the simulation, the hegemony officers were still confident. Vexlor had secured 2 of the 3 objective planets and was methodically advancing toward the 3rd. Lai Wei's forces remained scattered, offering only token resistance. "The girl is completely outmatched," Dresnel said. As expected, Admiral Zorax wasn't so certain. Something about the human's seemingly chaotic deployment bothered him. "She's allowing him to extend his supply lines," he murmured. "Watch." At the 15-minute mark, everything changed. Lai Wei's scattered forces suddenly converged from multiple vectors, striking Vexlor's extended fleet from angles he hadn't defended. Her attacks weren't aimed at his main force, but at his logistical support ships and communication relays. Ships she had apparently sacrificed earlier reappeared, having used the asteroid field to mask their movements. Vexlor's expression shifted from confidence to confusion as he frantically tried to regroup. His movements became reactive rather than strategic. Lai Wei's fingers flew across her interface, executing commands at a speed that left the alien commander struggling to respond. "Impossible," whispered Dresnel as they watched Vexlor lose control of one objective planet, then another. On Earth, millions held their breath as Lai Wei sprung her final trap. A small contingent of ships she'd hidden in the corona of the Red Giant emerged behind Vexlor's command vessel. The simulation ended abruptly as her forces overwhelmed his flagship's defenses. For several seconds, silence reigned on the Inevitable Conquest bridge. "How?" Vexlor finally asked, his voice tight with humiliation. "How did a primitive know to use stellar radiation to mask ship signatures? That technique isn't even in their scientific literature." Lai Wei removed her headset, her expression calm despite the sweat on her brow. When she spoke, her words were translated for the hegemony fleet. "It was patched into the game 3 years ago," she said simply. "Anyone who plays competitively knows that trick." On Earth, celebrations erupted across continents. In the UN Observation Center, diplomats embraced. On social media, Lai Wei's name became the top trending topic worldwide. Admiral Zorax leaned back in his command chair, watching the human celebrations with growing fascination. A game. They had turned warfare into a game, and in doing so, had developed strategies his own military had never considered. "Prepare the second challenge," he ordered quietly, "and select our best ground combat specialist." The real competition, Zorax realized, had only just begun. "Impossible." Major Krestar slammed his fist against the holographic display, his skin flushing a deep purple with rage. The human used tactics that violate every principle of urban warfare. Admiral Zorax watched the replay of the second competition with growing fascination. The ground combat simulation had just concluded with another human victory, this one even more decisive than the first. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a former Marine and professional gamer from Mexico City, had led her virtual squad through a devastated cityscape against Krestar's forces. The alien commander had deployed according to hegemony doctrine, securing high ground, establishing overlapping fields of fire, and advancing in textbook formation. Rodriguez had ignored all conventional tactics. She'd split her forces into seemingly vulnerable small teams, used underground infrastructure in ways no military strategist would consider sound, and repeatedly sacrificed defensible positions to gain unexpected advantages elsewhere. She treated cover as temporary, Zorax mused, pausing the replay. Look here, she never remains in one position longer than 14 seconds, even when doctrine would demand at least 3 minutes to establish a proper defensive perimeter. It's madness, Krestar insisted. No proper military would fight this way. And yet, Zorax replied quietly, she won. The third competition had proven even more disturbing. Hiroshi Tanaka, a mild-mannered economics professor from Kyoto, had transformed a resource management simulation into an economic weapon. His civilization had developed along paths the hegemony algorithms couldn't predict, creating technologies in sequences their models deemed impossible. 3 competitions, 3 human victories, Zorax announced to his assembled officers. Explain this. Silence gripped the room until Intelligence Officer Mezra stepped forward. Admiral, our analysis of human gaming culture is complete. The results are unexpected. The holographic display filled with statistics and imagery. Humans haven't just been playing games. They've been competing, innovating, and evolving their strategic thinking through these simulations for generations. Their most popular games often involve warfare, resource management, and civilization development, the very scenarios we've challenged them with. The display showed millions of players worldwide, tournaments with prize pools larger than the GDP of small nations, and gaming communities that had existed for decades, while we trained specialists in controlled environments. Mezra continued, humans have turned strategic thinking into a global pastime. They have millions of minds constantly testing boundaries, finding exploits, and developing counters to established strategies. Another officer spoke up, but they're just games, not real warfare. That distinction, Zorax replied, may be precisely what gives them their advantage. In real warfare, failure means death. In their games, failure is merely an opportunity to learn and improve. He gestured to the display showing Sergeant Rodriguez's unorthodox tactics. When you've died 1,000 simulated deaths, you learn which rules can be broken. When you've built and lost countless virtual civilizations, you discover developmental pathways we would never consider. Zorax's communicator chimed, a priority message from Hegemony High Command. He dismissed his officers before reading it. The message was brief and unmistakable. End this embarrassment immediately. Commence the invasion as planned. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Zorax hesitated to follow orders. He stared at the human victories replaying on his screens, a strange respect growing within him. Admiral, Mezra said softly from the doorway, the 4th competition is scheduled to begin in 6 hours. Our resource management specialist has withdrawn, citing health concerns. Zorax made his decision. Inform High Command that additional assessment is required before invasion, and tell our competitors that I will personally represent the hegemony in the next challenge. As Mezra departed, Zorax turned back to the screens, studying the human victories with new eyes. What else have you learned through your games? He wondered aloud. And what might we learn from you? Admiral Zorax prepared for the 4th competition with an intensity that surprised even his longest-serving officers. He dismissed his aides, locked himself in his private chambers, and spent 18 hours studying the previous human victories, analyzing every decision, every unexpected move. Admiral, Mezra called through the communication system. We've received Dr. Eleanor Patel's profile as requested. The holographic display materialized before him. Dr. Patel, 52 years old, former strategic advisor to the Indian military, now a game designer specializing in complex political simulations. Her most famous creation, Stellar Diplomacy, had won awards for its intricate balance of military strategy, resource management, and diplomatic maneuvering. Zorax studied her image, gray-streaked hair pulled back severely, sharp eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. An opponent worthy of his 3 centuries of experience. The simulation parameters have been finalized, Mesra continued. As you requested, it includes all elements: military, economic, and diplomatic. Duration: 14 Earth hours. Zorax nodded. Broadcast to begin in 30 minutes. No interruptions unless High Command overrides my authority directly. The competition arena was unlike anything Earth had seen before. Rather than a simple split screen, viewers watched as complex holographic displays showed 2 nascent civilizations developing across a virtual galaxy. Each competitor controlled not just military forces, but entire societies, their economies, scientific research, diplomatic relations, and cultural development. Dr. Patel sat straight-backed in a climate-controlled room at the United Nations, her fingers dancing across interfaces designed by the hegemony. Across the solar system, Zorax commanded from his flagship, employing strategies perfected over centuries of actual galactic conquest. 7 hours in, billions of viewers worldwide watched with growing tension. The Admiral civilization had established a clear military advantage, controlling key resource-rich systems and strategic choke points. Dr. Patel's civilization appeared to be focusing on scientific and cultural development at the expense of military strength, a decision many commentators criticized as naive. "She's playing to lose," said a retired general on a news broadcast. "You can't win a space empire game without military dominance." But at the 8-hour mark, something unexpected happened. Dr. Patel's civilization discovered a technology that allowed faster-than-light communication, an innovation that came several development stages earlier than in the hegemony's historical timeline. She immediately leveraged this to form a diplomatic alliance with a neutral civilization that Zorax had been planning to conquer. Zorax's 4 eyes widened in surprise. The neutral civilization had been programmed with hegemony psychological profiles. They should have been intimidated by military strength, not swayed by diplomatic overtures. "Fascinating approach," he murmured, adjusting his strategy. 3 hours later, their virtual civilizations faced a crisis. A stellar phenomenon threatened a densely populated system. Zorax diverted military resources to evacuation efforts, following established hegemony crisis protocols. Dr. Patel did something surprising. She proposed a joint rescue operation between their civilizations. The request appeared in his diplomatic coup. Zorax hesitated. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never cooperated with an opponent. Every encounter had been zero-sum. Yet something about the elegant simplicity of her proposal intrigued him. "Accept," he commanded, curious to see where this would lead. For the next hour, their civilizations worked together, sharing resources and technologies to save the virtual population. Zorax found himself oddly engaged by the cooperation, noting how Dr. Patel's scientists complemented his military logistics. When the crisis passed, their civilizations remained loosely allied. Earth viewers were shocked. The alien Admiral was cooperating with humanity's representative. Hegemony officers watched in confused silence as their leader continued this unprecedented approach. But Zorax had recognized something crucial. Dr. Patel wasn't playing to win against him. She was playing to create a better outcome for both civilizations. It was a paradigm the hegemony had never considered. The 4th competition ended with Dr. Patel's narrow victory, achieved not through military dominance, but through a complex web of alliances, technological innovations, and cultural influence that eventually left Zorax's civilization dependent on hers. The Admiral had conceded with genuine respect, a gesture that shocked his officers and intrigued Earth's observers. Now, with the competition score at 4-0 in humanity's favor, Zorax retreated to his private chambers and did something unprecedented. He ordered his ship's AI to download Earth's entire cultural and historical database. "Display chronological development of human warfare simulations," he commanded, settling into his meditation cradle. The holographic display filled with images spanning centuries, from ancient chessboards to early computer games to modern immersive simulations. Zorax watched humanity's bloody history unfold alongside their games, how each real conflict spawned new simulations, how those simulations in turn influenced military thinking. Fascinating, he murmured. They rehearse possible futures endlessly. A priority communication interrupted his study. High Command again, this time with a direct order. Commence invasion within 12 Earth hours or be relieved of command. Zorax acknowledged receipt but continued his research. Meanwhile, on Earth, the human representatives have begun identifying critical weaknesses in hegemony tactics, their over-reliance on established doctrine, their predictable responses, their inability to improvise rapidly when plans failed. Gaming communities worldwide collaborated on strategy forums, pooling their observations of alien thought patterns. They approach every problem sequentially, noted a popular streamer from Brazil to her millions of followers. Watch their resource gathering. They never start a new collection effort until the previous one is optimized. No human player would be that rigid. At the United Nations Strategic Gaming Division, a hastily assembled team of military analysts and professional gamers, Dr. Patel shared her insights from directly competing against Zorax. He's different, she explained. He learns, adapts. When our civilizations cooperated during the stellar crisis, he seemed almost curious, like he'd never considered that option. The fifth competition was scheduled to begin in 3 hours, a team-based tactical simulation pitting 5 hegemony specialists against 5 humans from different backgrounds. Aboard the inevitable conquest, Zorax made his decision. He opened a secure channel to Sub-Commander Vexlor. The fifth competition proceeds as scheduled, he ordered. But you will implement Tactical Variation Protocol 7. Vexlor's expression betrayed his shock. Admiral, that protocol is experimental. It contradicts standard hegemony doctrine. Precisely, Zorax replied. Our standard approaches have failed 4 times. We must adapt, as they do. As Vexlor departed, Zorax returned to the historical display. Something about humanity's development path fascinated him. Unlike the hegemony's careful linear progress, human history was chaotic, filled with false starts, radical innovations, and paradigm shifts. Computer, analyze fundamental differences between hegemony educational methodology and Earth's gaming culture, he ordered. The AI's response was immediate. Hegemony education emphasizes correct answers and proven methodologies. Earth gaming culture emphasizes experimentation, failure as learning, and constant evolution of strategies. Zorax considered this. For 10,000 years, the hegemony had expanded through conquest rather than innovation. They had absorbed technologies, but not thinking patterns. They had encountered no species that approached problems quite like humans did. When the fifth competition began, Zorax watched with new understanding as the human team, a chess grandmaster, an emergency room doctor, a firefighter, a wilderness guide, and a teenage hacker, communicated in ways his specialists couldn't anticipate. They used cultural shorthand, abandoned failing approaches immediately, and improvised solutions that no hegemony training would have produced. Despite Tactical Variation Protocol 7, the hegemony team lost decisively. As celebrations erupted across Earth, Zorax sent a private message to the human team's leader. Your species plays as though your survival depends on it. Perhaps it always has. He was beginning to understand the true value of games. You've exceeded your authority, Admiral. The holographic projection of Grand Executor Nexforet towered in Zorax's chamber, her voice resonating with barely contained fury. 5 defeats, 5 humiliations broadcast across the hegemony. The High Council demands immediate action. Zorax stood firm, his posture perfect despite the weight of centuries of military conditioning urging him to submit. I request one final assessment, Grand Executor. One challenge that will definitively determine this species' value. Their value is not in question, Nexphora hissed, only their submission. With respect, Zorax countered. A species with their cognitive patterns could offer more to the hegemony as allies than as subjects. The word hung in the space between them. Allies. Not a concept the hegemony typically considered with less advanced civilizations. After a long pause, Nexphora spoke. One final challenge. Winner takes all. Failure means your immediate replacement and planetary sterilization protocol. When the transmission ended, Zorax called his officers. Prepare the historical simulation, he ordered. Full hegemony developmental timeline. Unredacted. Sub-Commander Vexilor's skin paled. Admiral, those files are classified. No non-hegemony species has ever. I am aware, Zorax interrupted. Prepare the simulation. On Earth, the announcement of the final challenge sent governments into crisis mode. A simulation of managing an entire civilization from primitive beginnings to interstellar empire, using real hegemony historical data. The advantage to the aliens would be overwhelming. It's a trap, insisted military advisors worldwide. They're guaranteeing victory. At the United Nations, representatives debated who should represent humanity in this final test. The names of renowned strategists, historians, and game designers were proposed and rejected. Then a message arrived from Lagos, Nigeria. 15-year-old Amara Okafor, whose brilliance in strategy games had made her a global phenomenon, had requested permission to serve as Earth's representative. This isn't sensible, argued the Secretary General. The fate of our planet cannot rest on a child. Dr. Patel, who had faced Zorax directly, disagreed. Age is irrelevant. The Admiral respects unconventional thinking. Amara has never lost a civilization-building competition. Her brain works differently. She sees patterns we don't. After hours of debate, they agreed. Humanity's fate would rest with Amara Okafor. The final competition stretched across 3 Earth days. Amara sat in a specially designed interface chamber, her hands moving across hegemony controls adapted for human physiology. Surrounded by support teams of scientists, strategists, and medical staff, she remained in a state of intense focus, pausing only for brief hydration and nutrition breaks. Across the solar system, Zorax guided his civilization along the exact developmental path the hegemony had followed over millennia, a path optimized by their most brilliant minds. By the second day, something remarkable began to emerge. Amara's civilization was taking evolutionary leaps that the hegemony had never considered. Where Zorax's society developed technology sequentially, Amara pursued multiple research paths simultaneously, accepting partial failures as learning opportunities. Where hegemony's social structures enforced conformity, Amara's encouraged controlled chaos that sparked innovation. Earth's observers watched in amazement as her virtual civilization began achieving technological breakthroughs centuries ahead of the historical hegemony timeline. This isn't just a game to her, Dr. Patel observed. She's reimagining civilization itself. Aboard the Inevitable Conquest Zorax's officers watched with growing concern as the Admiral became increasingly engrossed in studying Amara's methods. He barely spoke, his eyes fixed on the developmental patterns emerging in her civilization. Admiral, Vexilor finally ventured, we are approaching the 48th hour. The human is outpacing our historical development by nearly 2 centuries. Yes, Zorax replied, his voice distant. She is showing us what we missed. By the final day, the outcome was inevitable. When Amara's civilization developed faster than light travel 2 centuries, before the hegemony had managed it in actual history, Zorax made a decision that would change 2 civilizations forever. Admiral Zorax requests parley. The message appeared simultaneously on viewing screens aboard the Inevitable Conquest and across Earth. For several long moments, silence gripped both worlds. In a secure conference room at the United Nations, world leaders gathered anxiously. When the doors opened, Admiral Zorax entered alone, a breach of hegemony protocol so severe that his own security detail had attempted to physically prevent him from departing the shuttle. "I have dismissed my guards," he announced, his translator rendering his words with perfect clarity. "What I have to say requires no witnesses but you." He placed a small device on the table. It projected a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with thousands of worlds marked in various colors. For 10,000 years, the galactic hegemony has expanded through conquest rather than innovation. He began, his voice carrying an emotion the humans couldn't quite identify. "We believe this was strength. Your species has shown me it is weakness." The projection changed, showing resource depletion patterns across hundreds of worlds, atmospheric collapse on colony planets, and disturbing readings from the edges of known space. "The hegemony faces extinction-level threats we cannot overcome," Zorax continued. "Our rigid thinking has left us unable to develop solutions. We conquer because we no longer know how to create." The room remained silent as the implications settled over Earth's representatives. "What you call games," Zorax said, gesturing toward Amara, who sat wide-eyed in a corner of the room, "we now recognize as your greatest evolutionary tool. The ability to imagine countless futures and prepare for them." He moved closer to the human leaders, his massive frame somehow less threatening than before. Young Amara's civilization achieved in virtual form what the hegemony could not in reality. She showed us paths we never considered, solutions we were blind to. In 3 days, she demonstrated development patterns that would have saved us centuries of struggle. Zorax straightened to his full height, his 4 eyes focusing on each face in the room. "I am not here to accept your surrender, nor to offer mine. I propose something unprecedented, an alliance. Your cognitive abilities combined with our technology could address problems threatening not just our civilizations, but all sentient life in this sector of the galaxy." Murmurs filled the room. The Secretary General stepped forward. "Your superiors, will they accept this proposal?" "No," Zorax answered simply. "Not initially. They will recall me, possibly execute me for this heresy. But they will examine the data I send them. They will study the developmental patterns Amara created. And eventually they will understand what I now see, that the future belongs to those who can imagine it in all its possibilities, not those who follow a single predetermined path." 3 Earth weeks later, the hegemony fleet departed the solar system. As promised, Zorax had been recalled, his fate uncertain. But he had left behind something unprecedented, a comprehensive database of hegemony knowledge as a gesture of good faith, and a communication channel that would remain open regardless of his personal outcome. In his final message to Earth, sent privately to Amara Okafor, was attached a game of his own design, a simulation of possible futures for human hegemony relations. "The goal isn't to win against your opponent," read the game's opening text. "It's to become better than your previous self." In his quarters aboard the command ship returning him to the hegemony capital, Admiral Zorax sat before his console, continuing the civilization simulation Amara had begun. He had copied it before leaving Earth, fascinated by the developmental pathways she had discovered. As his ship entered hyperspace, he reflected on how a species' games revealed their truest nature. The hegemony played at conquest. Humans played at possibilities. And possibilities, Zorax now understood, were humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy.